President Trump ordering strikes on Syria.
American, British, and French warships and planes launching dozens of missiles targeting the Syrian regime's chemical weapons sites. Video from Syria overnight shows missiles lighting up that night sky. But this morning, Syrian state TV with defiant images of people in the streets, and they are celebrating.
President Trump addressing the nation overnight, calling the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, quote, an animal. The U.S.-led strikes are in retaliation for a suspected chemical weapons attack Assad carried out against his own people, killing women and children. The video horrifying the world.
If you remember, the strikes, they come just about 1 year after President Trump ordered a first round of strikes after another chemical attack. So will this time be different? And how does the U.S. avoid getting pulled into a bloody 7-year civil war? We're going to have team coverage this morning, but we do begin with ABC's David Muir, anchor of World News Tonight, who's on the ground from Beirut. David, good morning.
Dan and Paula, good morning. As you know, President Trump addressing the nation shortly after 9 p.m. last night, telling Americans that U.S.-led precision airstrikes had begun over Syria with help from both the UK and from France, two of our strongest allies. They talked about these strikes being aimed directly at chemical weapons capabilities, the facilities in Syria where they believe these chemical weapons have been made. The president talking about the images the world saw of the children who suffered in agony, some of them not surviving. More than 40 died in that attack, talking about mothers and daughters gasping for air, and said this was the work. These are the crimes of a monster. Overnight, airstrikes lighting up the Syrian sky. American, British, and French forces launching a joint strike offensive, destroying 3 targets. Explosions could be heard across the region. A coordinated cruise missile attack from sea and air. Retaliation for that alleged chemical weapons attack 6 days ago. The military operation planned targets, chemical weapons facilities. They targeted weapons storage units so that there would be minimal civilian casualties. Syrian television reporting this morning that 3 civilians were harmed when missiles hit a military base in Homs. Overnight, President Trump underscoring the horror of the Syrian regime's chemical weapons attack on its own people.
The evil and the despicable attack left mothers and fathers, infants and children thrashing in pain and gasping for air. These are not the actions of a man. They are crimes of a monster instead.
Syrian state media this morning saying that the scientific research center in Barza, north of Damascus, and warehouses belonging to the Syrian army in Homs were among those targeted in the attack. There are conflicting reports coming in from both Damascus and Moscow as to the number of alleged U.S. missiles that were shot down before they could reach their targets. Supporters of the Assad regime this morning now dancing in the streets in Damascus, following Syria's response to the attacks. There is reaction this morning in Syria. Syrian television now saying that this was a cowardly terrorist attack only done for America to save face, and continuing to try to push that storyline that the Russians have proof that the Duma chemical attack is a, quote, masquerade. But as we heard from the Defense Secretary James Mattis overnight, he said 1 year ago in that airstrike in Syria, they clearly did not learn their lesson. This time, the U.S. military, he said, struck harder. Dan, Paula?
Great, David Muir reporting from the region. And shortly after the president's announcement, the nation's top military brass went before the cameras.
As David mentioned, we heard from the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who has expressed concerns about America getting entangled in a wider war here. So let's go to ABC's chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, who's covering that angle from Washington. Martha, good morning.
Good morning, Dan and Paula. The Pentagon response was swift and precise, with the Pentagon warning it could happen again. Just days after President Trump warned that smart missiles would be launched into Syria, the president gave the order.
A short time ago, I ordered the United States Armed Forces to launch precision strikes on targets associated with the chemical weapons capabilities of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad.
The president also pointing the finger at Iran and Russia for their staunch support of the Syrian regime.
To Iran and to Russia, I ask, what kind of a nation wants to be associated with the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children?
But Russian and Iranian assets were not targeted, the U.S. hoping to avoid any escalation beyond the borders of Syria. The Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff made clear these strikes targeted only chemical weapons infrastructure and were done with great care.
The strike was not only a strong message to the regime that their actions were inexcusable, but it also inflicted maximum damage without unnecessary risk to innocent civilians.
Last year's strike with 59 cruise missiles was aimed only at a Syrian airfield, but despite the damage, was back in operation just days later.
Clearly, the Assad regime did not get the message last year.
Mattis said this strike used more than double the number of missiles used last year, and if Assad attacks his people with chemical weapons again, the U.S. will again be prepared to strike.
Right now, this is a one-time shot, and I believe that it sent a very strong message to dissuade him, to deter him from doing this again.
But this is it for the punishing airstrikes for last week's deadly chemical attack. Mattis, as you heard, calling it a one-time shot. So only if Assad uses the chemical weapons again will the U.S. respond.
Okay, so Martha, Putin is responding, defiantly saying that this attack was a clear violation of the UN. He's even denying that there was a chemical attack last week, claiming that it was staged. Should we expect Russia to retaliate?
They've been denying it all along. I think you will hear lots of huffing and puffing from Russia, but they don't want this to escalate any more than the U.S. does. And in the end, this missile strike was not anywhere near what it could have been. And while the U.S. did not let Russia know what they were targeting last night, unlike last year, they did have that deconfliction line open, telling the Russians where they would be operating last night. Dana Paula.
Nobody wants this to escalate. Martha, thank you. For more on all of this, let's bring in ABC News contributor Colonel Steve Ganyard. He's a former State Department official and Marine Corps fighter pilot. Steve, good morning. So as we know, we've done this before. We did it about a year ago when we attacked that Syrian airfield. It appears not to have worked because they continue with the suspected chemical weapons attack. So how is this time different? Do you think it will work now?
It's almost the same attack, but just a broader number of targets, Dan, and a broader area over Syria. So I think the thing to think about here is that the message is the same message that was sent last year, this time just shouted a bit louder.
When you look at the targets, Steve, the targets were chemical weapons arsenals. So what is the ultimate goal here? Apparently it's not to take out Assad.
No, Paula, there was apparently debate within the White House. There were some people that wanted to go in and have a crippling attack on Assad himself, take out infrastructure. But the allies and I think part of the Pentagon said, no, we need to stay out of this war. And so it was very, very prescribed, very, very small target set and focused just on chemical weapons. Nobody wants to get involved in this terrible civil war. And Mr. Assad would do best to just let the U.S., as the president has tweeted, pull out in a few months and continue on with his murderous ways.
7-year civil war, hundreds of thousands of victims, both refugees and people who've died. But let me just get back to these strikes overnight. How did the U.S. and its allies hit things like a sarin gas storage supply without detonating a deadly nerve agent and sending it everywhere?
Yeah, there may be a little bit of irony there, Dan. If you remember after the last strike, the Russians agreed to escort all of the sarin gas out of Syria. So there shouldn't have been any sarin gas. We know that the attack in Duma was chlorine gas, which is not illegal. It's found everywhere in common everyday life. But the sarin should have been gone. So the question is, were we putting missiles into empty bunkers?
Colonel Steve Ganyard, we really appreciate your analysis on this extremely busy Saturday morning. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.